What you're about to hear is a conversation with Walter Benn Michaels. If you don't know who he is, it's high time that you learned. But if you do know who he is, then you know why I feel so proud to have had him on. Walter Benn Michaels is a close friend and collaborator of Dr. Adolph Reed Jr., who some of you, probably a good number of you, are already familiar with. Some of you will have read the book that Walter Benn Michaels and Dr. Adolph Reed Jr. recently wrote together called No Politics But Class Politics. So I hope you'll get a lot out of this. I know I did. Walter is a critic of theory, of academic theory specifically. And so I don't know what exactly he expected from this conversation. I don't exactly know what I expected. But let's just say I was happy with it, and he wants to come back. And so I think he was happy with it too. But with that, if you're curious about Theory Underground, if you want to know about the kinds of courses we teach, the seminars that are the ongoing research seminars here at Theory Underground, or just kind of like what's the point of all this? Like, what are we doing? What's the vibe? Just stick around until the end of the video. I've made a special PSA. That'll help you get a sense for what's going on. Okay? But for now, let's get right to it. This is our conversation with Walter Benn Michaels. It happened on September 18th, 2024. Welcome back to the stream, everybody, to the Epic Marathon live stream here on September 18th, as well as for everybody listening to this on the podcast and YouTube channel in the future, once this goes up as a standalone video. Today, we are joined by Walter Benn Michaels, the author of The Trouble with Diversity, as well as a brand new book with Dr. Adolph Reed Jr. that I'm hoping we can get into a little bit today. How are you doing, Walter?
I'm fine. How are you?
Fantastic. And so I kind of wanted to start with that. What is this most recent book that you did? Am I correct that it is called No Politics But Class Politics?
Yes. And it's basically an extension of part of it is a series of conversations between me and Adolph Reed. I don't know if your audience knows who Adolph Reed is, but he and I and a bunch of others, a guy called Ken Warren, Adolph's son, Teray Reed, Barbara Fields, the late Karen Fields, wrote a book called Racecraft, are all people who are involved in a kind of anti-identitarian commitment to class. On the left, the anti-identitarian part is the expression of a certain skepticism about the way racial identity is deployed as part of what we describe as essentially neoliberal leftism. So no politics but class politics, which looks like you're holding something very large in your hand. Maybe that's
Yeah,
it.
this is it. Yeah, Renewing
No,
Black Intellectual History. Yeah.
that's Adolph. That's a book by Adolph. That's not No Politics but Class Politics. But yeah, that's another book of his with Ken Warren.
Right. He did this with Ken Warren, and it's a fantastic book. It's one that has come up in courses that I've taught a couple of times so far on Theory Underground. So,
And so the basic argument of that is just that we should be committed to a class politics, not a race politics, and that the idea that you can do both race and class is in a trivial sense true and in a strong sense false.
So what do you mean by, in a strong sense, it's false? Could we get into that a little bit?
So the trivial sense in which it's true is like, yeah, we should all be anti-racist. The strong sense in which it's false is like, take an example. In the U.S. today, the fastest growing job is healthcare aides. Healthcare aides require no education. Actually, they don't technically even require high school education. They get paid in what commensurately, that is, they're extremely badly paid. I haven't looked at the Bureau of Labor Statistics about this in about a year or so, but they're paid about $28,000 a year. No one can actually make a living doing that. Unsurprisingly, they are overwhelmingly women, and equally unsurprisingly, they're overwhelmingly women of color. So why? Because like sexism has pushed women into undesirable jobs for hundreds of years in the US, and the same thing goes for racism. So an anti-racist commitment which is the dominant commitment in the kind of liberal left US politics today, says that the injustice here is that so many women, disproportionate number of women, disproportionate number of women of color are forced into, in effect, taking these bad jobs. They have less education, they get less paid, and the cycle just repeats itself. So, a solution to that problem would be no, actually, women and women of color would have equal opportunity with everybody else, i.e., especially with white men, to succeed instead of being like right now, 60% of the workforce, actually more than that, 70% of this workforce, they'd be more like, let's say for women of color, they'd be more like what they probably are in the proportion of the society, like about 25 to 30%. And there'd be lots of white men doing those jobs. So from the standpoint of anti-racism, or basically from the standpoint of anti-discrimination more generally, a just result is a result in which women of color are not disproportionately, i.e., overrepresented in bad jobs, and by contrast, underrepresented in good jobs. But the obvious problem is that doesn't solve the problem of economic inequality at all. I mean, all it does is reshuffle the race and sex of the people who are doing the bad jobs. If you're committed to a class politics, part of the class politics is say the problem here is not who's taking these jobs. The primary problem here is how these jobs are treated. These jobs, in fact, are important jobs. One reason these people are paid so badly is because the jobs are, it's because the healthcare system is largely privatized. The people need to make profits out of this, and the way they make profits is by paying these actually essential workers, literally essential workers during COVID, infinitely less money than they ought to be paid. So what we ought to be doing is not worrying so much about how many people, what the skin color or sex the people who take these jobs is. We should worry about making them good jobs. And what you want to do is not create a world in which the current inequalities persist, but they are given a kind of band-aid by the fact that everybody is racially and sexually proportionate at each level, high and low. What you want to do is minimize or ideally get rid of those inequalities. So those two things, you can sort of do both, but if you're just doing the first one, the anti-discrimination part, you're actually just achieving a kind of neoliberal wet dream, which is that you have continuation of inequality, but there's been no discrimination involved. That's why basically anti-racism and anti-sexism are the good conscience of neoliberalism. If you go the other route and say, no, what we want to do above all is actually make these jobs into good jobs, and actually, even if you sort of suspended the question of discrimination for a second, although you shouldn't and we wouldn't, but even if you did, say it doesn't really matter who ends up taking the jobs from the standpoint of race and sex, if they're good jobs, that people want them, then in fact, that actually addresses the problem of inequality. So the core argument of no politics but class politics is that the more you hear people talking about race and gender, the more you hear people talking about sexuality, the more you hear people talking about diversity, the more you hear people arguing for an anti-discrimination that essentially serves as the good conscience of inequality. That is the idea that inequality is not so bad if the people who have been harmed by it actually were not harmed by being discriminated against racially, sexually, or in terms of their sexuality. Whereas our argument is that no, the inequality is itself a problem. And if that's what you're dealing with, it's not made better. If you can say to some like white guy who went to Harvard, but is now still working for whatever reason as a healthcare worker in a nursing home in Chicago, hey dude, you had a chance to escape all that, but you couldn't escape it. It's your own fault.
Mm-hmm. Which kind of relates to what I take to be the major thesis of the trouble with diversity, if I remember correctly, being that, I mean, on the one side, and we can get into this, it legitimates the existing system while simultaneously erasing certain kinds of injustice, as well as certain kinds of historical injustices. And I think you used the example of somebody put out of work and bankrupted because of Reaganism, but that person happens to be white. And the issue with DEI is like that person's not included. And then even if you were to include that person, there's other people falling through the cracks. There's constantly going to be people falling through the cracks. Whereas if you just focused on the class politics, it would disproportionately benefit all of the various groups that have been marginalized or historically oppressed.
Yeah, so two things, both of those are right. The second thing is kind of an important point, which people periodically get and then totally forget, which is that if you do universal, the commitment to universalism, you will disproportionately benefit all the people who are currently disproportionately unbenefited for precisely the same reason they're unbenefited. So yeah, right now, the Black population of the US is like disproportionately poor and disproportionately under rich, not rich. I think the top 10%, it's a smaller number than the actual 13 point, whatever it is, 6% of the population is Black. And at the bottom, it's a larger number. Absolutely speaking, the largest number of poor people are still white, but proportionately, it's actually disproportionate. So the point is, if you do universal, you disproportionately benefit the people who are disproportionately being victimized by the system. So yeah, that point's exactly right. In other words, there's no loss for minority groups. On the contrary, to the degree that they have been victimized as minorities, they will be benefited by a universalist commitment. So that actually seems like a kind of basic point. All the time that Adolf and I others make this argument, it's always struck me the intensity of resistance to that, because it seems to me like almost uncontroversially, obviously true. The second part, though, is related but different, and that is, the question of historically how you came to be a victim of poverty is like irrelevant from the standpoint of socialism. I mean, what does it matter whether this is, why the reparations argument is so popular and so not progressive in any way at all. Reparations is a fundamentally conservative argument. Why does it matter, whether you're born poor because you're the great, 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 great grandchild of slaves and the grandchild of people who suffered under Jim Crow and the child of people who suffered under the legacy of Jim Crow, or whether you're born poor because your great, 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 great grandfather was actually a slave owner, but, he drank away his estate and gambled away his estate, and all the money got lost and you're born poor. So obviously the kind of moral tale, we morally prefer the victimized slave to the victimizing slaveholder, but you're not responsible for either one of those things. The question of your responsibility is not in question. You're not responsible for how you're born at all. So even if we accept a kind of meritocracy argument for legitimating inequality, you haven't yet had the time to accumulate or any merit or the lack of merit. So part of the argument is that Marx famously said, philosophers only tried to understand the world. The point is to change it. I always felt he should have added, historians have tried to understand the past. The point, however, is to forget it. That is, from the standpoint of social justice, history is irrelevant. That is, from the standpoint of a social justice. Now, that's not true from the standpoint of a social justice where the question of who deserves to be rich and who deserves to be poor, from that standpoint, it's totally relevant. From the standpoint of who really did inherit the money and who didn't inherit the money, it's totally relevant. So capitalism makes history relevant. So people go around talking about the importance of history, going around completely, as it were, imbibing and then representing as if it were a kind of leftist project. The idea that what we have to do is be more aware of our history, and the whole idea of a reparative history. We're not trying to repair the history. We can't do fuck all for the people who were dead 100 years ago, right? We're trying to actually do it for the people who are here now, and we don't need another history. History is a matter of really, as it were, technical indifference to us, since if we feel we owe them some form of equality, we owe them to it not in virtue of bad things that did or did not happen to their ancestors, or even of bad things that did or did not happen to them. We owe to them, to ourselves, either way.
Right.
So
What
kind of cool.
What comes to mind for me is during 2020, the relief in Oakland. It wasn't a UBI; it was a PBI, a particularist basic income. It was only if you're Black, right? And it's just, I mean, this is the definition of means testing, right?
Yeah, I mean, so means testing is really a bad idea. It's a bad idea when it's done racially. It's a bad idea when it's done economically, totally. So UBI is not a very good idea either, in my view, but I'm not a specialist in that. But if you ever feel like it, there's a great book by two guys called Daniel Zamora and Anton Yeager. Danielle and Anton actually were both the editors of No Politics but Class Politics, and they've written a book published by University of Chicago Press, which is both a history of and a critique of UBI. If you get them on, it's useful to get them on because the book is a little, from my perspective anyway, when I'm doing political writing, I like to write polemically. And The Trouble with Diversity is a very polemical book, and No Politics but Class Politics contains a lot of polemical stuff in it. Danielle and Anton wrote a kind of more historical, and to my view, slightly overly judicious account of UBI. But it's very clear by the end, and they're very clear in the writing, is that they're opposed to it. And they're opposed to it, for really the primary grounds being is that UBI is a kind of completely a neoliberal solution to this problem, which is you need people to have money to spend is the
Yeah,
kind of core of it. And
right.
what you need to do is not, in effect, produce a state which will guarantee people housing, guarantee people healthcare,
Hmm.
guarantee people a minimum level of sustenance. What you need to do, this is why Foucault liked neoliberalism. What you need to do is give them a lot of money, and they can spend it the way they want, and you won't judge them. So
Right.
Foucault liked the don't judge them part, right? But Foucault didn't like the state. Um, I don't think you guys like the state too much either, but I'm not sure of that. I like the
Mixture.
state. I want a big state. So
Yeah.
part of the point would be that, yeah, that's what the responsibility of the state is to do, is to precisely guarantee those things, which is to say to take them out of the economy rather than to put them into the economy, or rather than to totally privatize them. So obviously we're going the exact opposite direction, and UBI is a way to continue to go the exact opposite direction. So yeah, let's completely privatize healthcare, but we're going to give you X. I mean, right now, we're ignoring the complete impracticality of doing it. They had a big Chicago UBI playing, and what it did was give like 5,000 families $500 a month. Um, so you can go that far, and it was experimental. Don't go that far. And guess what they discovered? The 500 families were totally fucking grateful. Were 5,000 families to get the $500 a month, and they were able to use it. It was completely means tested, but still, it's better than not giving it to them. It's not as if. But the point being is that so we take away the healthcare, we take away the housing, we don't the public, we take away the whole concept of public good, but we give you your X money, make it a real amount of money, and then you can spend it the way you want. Like, for example, you can spend it on healthcare, you can spend it on this, and you can spend it on whatever you want. So the point of it is that it's a part the just a vision of a world in which everything is privatized, and the social justice model of privatization is give people a kind of basic amount of money so that they can decide where to put their money on their own. And again, that is the part that Foucault kind of liked.
And that's the Foucauldian part. And as opposed to that, which would be more of this standard, what people think of as UBI model, you're proposing something more like a UBG, universal basic goods model. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't know if there is such a thing as UBG, but yeah, be proposing, yes, that the basic goods are guaranteed to everybody, which you want a society where healthcare is free for everyone. Now,
100%.
obviously, there are steps to go through to get to that, but of course, we're going in the opposite direction. And healthcare would be a good model. So, an important issue that's now kind of been backburnered, but will presumably come up again. Although, if there is a Trump administration, it may be the it may be superseded by many, many other civil rights issues, is like universal, Medicare for everyone. First of all, now I'm just on Medicare. Medicare for people on Medicare is not that great. You have to buy your various advantage plans. The whole point of the advantage plans is to increasingly privatize that. And the whole structure of it is obviously private, since what Medicare is doing is doing with private entities and paying the private entities only to get paid by the government. But the point being is that what you want is healthcare for everyone. You want healthcare for everyone, not because they have the right to decide, yeah, do I want to buy some more dope this afternoon, or do I want to buy or do I want to pay for my medication? But because their medication is guaranteed to them. And that's something that comes as a basic right in society, which actually is treating healthcare, sustenance, and, a place to live as a basic right. So if you want to call it UBG, I'm totally for it.
Cool. Same. And also in terms of the state, I'm totally for questioning the state, but also I don't believe that there's any such thing as large scale structural change that opens up any way forward without a state. And so,
Yeah,
um,
totally.
yeah,
No,
100%.
we're good. We're totally good.
All right. Virtual handshake. Now, I have one last question on class politics and trouble with diversity, and it's just something that's pop culturally relevant right now. I'm just curious if you're aware of the work of Matt Walsh over at the Daily Wire, and if you have seen his new movie, Am I Racist?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
Um, Tell me something about it.
Uh, so, I like to say it this way. The left with social justice today, the way that it's usually performed, has made it possible for people who would be otherwise very boring to seem courageous and speak the truth. And that I think that Matt Walsh is one of those kinds of guys. And what he does is a kind of Bo Rat act where he dresses up like a liberal arts student. He has a man bun and the intellectual glasses.
Yeah,
And then
I'm looking at it now.
he goes and he has these conversations with all of these different people, including Robin DiAngelo. And it's like, you know, he's on the journey as a white man. He wants to do the work. And at the end of the interview with Robin DiAngelo, he brings on the producer of the documentary, his black friend. And he goes, I just wanted to acknowledge that you're here and that this is your movie that we're in. And, you know, I know that we want reparations, but I'm going to start the charge right now. I'm just going to give you reparations. And so he opens his wallet and starts paying the guy. And Robin DiAngelo is acting like she's never heard of anything like personal reparations. And she's all like, what? This is not a thing. And he's like, yes. And if you care, you'll do it too. And she's like, no, it's a system thing. And then he goes, yeah, but we can make the change today. We can take action. We don't have to wait. So she goes and gets her wallet and gives the guy $30. And the whole thing's a troll. It's pretty funny.
Yes, the thing about it is that anything that bad that happens to Robin DiAngelo is totally good. Can't quarrel with that. But you know, the one thing I would say about that, I mean, I haven't seen this, and I just got a little thing now, and there is a screenshot of guy who must be him, and the guy who must be his producer talking to someone who I know is Robin DiAngelo, and clearly persuading them to hand over $30. But you know, there is a kind of like mode today. So ever since the trouble with diversity, I mean, it didn't used to be podcasts back in the day, but ever since the trouble with diversity and met podcasts, then everything, and then in 2020 when everything blew up, you know, I do a lot of podcasts, or I don't actually ever listen to any of them or watch them. It's not my thing. I'm the wrong generation, but I've been on them a lot. And one of the things that people sort of do want, you know, the whole anti-woke thing is as much bullshit as the woke thing is.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now, I haven't seen this, and it sounds pretty funny, and that's always something. But the idea that you get to be on the left by making fun of Robin DiAngelo, making fun of Robin DiAngelo is maybe it's a necessary condition, but it's not a sufficient condition. You have to be committed to something like socialism to be on the left. So the number of people, I mean, like someone like Matt Taibbi, you know, who for a while was kind of flirting with a Bernie Sanders version of the left, and then just turned into Trumpists. That's a kind of a completely standard model. You see that in the magazine, the online magazine Compact, you know, in which Radolph and I refused to publish like a section of no politics but class politics, and then people get turned into the sort of sense of like opposing identitarianism, opposing wokeness. I mean, millions of books against woke. That's like a completely empty politics. From the standpoint of the left, all forms of anti-discrimination are appropriate. You know, it's not like I think that we should discriminate against Black people. We should discriminate against trans people. We should discriminate. I don't think that for a second. The point about it is that anti-discrimination is not in itself a mode of social justice that will produce greater equality. It's the element of a mode of social justice in which neoliberalism finds its truth being, yeah, anti-discrimination is bad. I mean, discrimination is bad, racism is bad. But it's absolutely, you know, just sort of like think that you can make a left politics or to make a kind of, I don't know if they think they're being left, make an attractive politics out of basically being opposed to the so-called excesses of identitarianism. Well, even the people who are committed to identitarianism are usually opposed to the excesses of it. Everybody's always opposed to the excesses of everything else. But the principle itself, that discrimination, is completely unjustified. 100%. So, you know, when you get like, you know, you just see you've seen over the last 4 or 5 years, and especially since 2020, as a certain kind of woke discourse as it seemed to be kind of all powerful, you saw a kind of like serious reaction against it. But the reaction against it is as much bullshit as the thing itself is. So the kind of, you know, the new heroes of the kind of, well, you know, the post-left would be a pure version of that. I'm definitely not post-left. And we're not writing we're actually just left. And the whole emergence of the post-left actually just seems to me, and sometimes it's very quick. People go right away and become like some version of Trumpist within 14 seconds. Sometimes it's slower. Well, not Trump, but not this, and and the English version was kind of more complicated a bit than the American version, but both are going in the same direction. The same direction being that no, actually, nationalism is a good thing, and actually, really clamping down on immigration is like a kind of crucial thing, and the working class should be kind of, the great Israeli, in a way, anti-Zionist historian Zev Sternhell, describing the foundation of Israel, said at one point, is the sort of founders of the Yishuv called themselves National Socialists. They didn't mean Nazis, but what they meant was they were committed to nationalism, i.e., they wanted a Jewish national home, they were committed to socialism. And Sternhell says, yeah, with National Socialism, with their National Socialism, and I think with everybody's National Socialism, nationalism always trumps socialism. And you got a version of that. You really see a powerful version of that today in American politics.
100%. Yeah, and
so
I guess to be 100% transparent as far as everything we're doing over here, Theory Underground is an assortment of people, some who call themselves left, some who are non-affiliated or independent, and the word post-left gets floated and applied to us, but I don't take any real relish in it, and I don't really like to wear it because I am like you in that I have not spent any serious time listening to podcasts, and as far as I'm concerned, the post-left is only something that exists on Twitter, now X, or on podcasts, and I haven't kept up with all those people, but I think that what you're basically saying is correct. Like, from what I can tell, there are people who listen to Tucker now instead of Jon Stewart, and it's like I don't think that's a real way forward. So whatever, it's boring. But Matthew Walsh, by the way, he is just a straight up conservative. He's not even pretending to have anything original to say except for it's a kind of, cheap American universalism. It is the kind of 1990s universalism that I think we're all kind of people are nostalgic for it because they're kind of sick of these excesses, right? But it's not Walsh has no real way forward. Neither does the Daily Wire. That's Ben Shapiro. That's his thing. The right. Daily Wire.
Well, it's like everybody finding anti-Semitism everywhere now. It's kind of that universalism, which is no, there should be no discrimination against anybody, but not that there should be actually a dismantling of private property. So the point about it is not dismantling of private property. Universalism, yeah, whatever. That's the part we're all for. That's why the left and right can meet. And the idea that, but yeah, those guys are, what makes them conservative is precisely that they're actually concerned above all with drawing the line at dismantling private property. That's not to be given up.
Yeah, and they're against the kinds of institutions or policies that would pave the way towards a UBG. Yo, what's up, listener or viewer?
Yo.
How you doing?
So I noticed you sitting there watching this video.
Yep.
And yeah, you're listening, you're paying attention. You're definitely not hearing everything we're saying though.
Yep. Nope, definitely not. You're not taking notes.
Yeah, take notes, dude. What are you doing?
Hey, you know what? If you want to be passive and just enjoy this content while multitasking, that's what we do as well. Everyone does that most of the time. We very rarely switch into this more active mode, and that's fine. That's fine because you're kind of absorbing this content as you go through your life, and that's great. But if you're going to do that, then we just have a little request of you. What's our little request, Nance?
We want you to do the algorithm things. We want you to hit the button, the thumbs up, or the thumbs down. Hit the subscribe button. You could even hit the bell so you get notified when there's an epic marathon stream.
Yeah.
Or one of the dope ass interviews. We just finished a dope ass interview.
Absolutely.
But do the things to help train your algorithm to actually give you content that you prefer. And at least here we are aware of the problem. We are aware that we're all infected with the algorithm, and we're trying to do something about it. So while you can maintain a cynical distance of not being an enthusiastic vocal supporter,
right?
Doing those actions actually, first of all, it helps the channel. It helps Theory Underground. But it helps your algorithm too. You will get less kind of shitty clickbait React content if you train your algorithm to give you what you prefer. I mean, you're already here. You're already watching this.
Yeah.
How,
And so enthusiastic, unironic, genuine support might be a little too much for some of you who are way too cool for that kind of thing. But you can at least hit the little like button and then we'll say we're even. Okay.
There we go. You owe us nothing now.
Yeah. Let's get back to it.
Is precisely that they're actually concerned above all with drawing the line at dismantling private property. That's not to be given up.
Yeah, and they're against the kinds of institutions or policies that would pave the way towards a UBG.
Yeah, completely. I mean, people want to shrink the state. That's who wants to shrink the state. Or if they're going to expand the state, they're going to expand the state only as a way of expanding the military, benefiting certain industries, et cetera, all the things we know. This is hardly new, right? But what they're against, is like, so I taught for many years at the University of Chicago. I retired. But I still get mail from them. And just like we're talking, something comes up saying, join this workshop, engaging anti-racism, white identity development, and minoritized racial trauma. When I say, yeah, that's like total bullshit from the standpoint of social justice. Nobody needs to worry about white identity development. And nobody needs to worry about minoritized racial trauma. What we need to do is worry about providing fundamental things that make a good life possible to everybody. And that requires attacking private property, not like trying to fix people's racial trauma.
Is there any way that addressing racial trauma could lead to anything other than paternalism?
Well, you don't even know what addressing racial trauma is. I mean, you have to be more explicit about that. I mean, the trauma in general is kind of a complicated concept, especially when it becomes intergenerational or systemic trauma. So it's not clear that those are projects that are involved in doing anything other than avoiding spending whatever money you're going to spend on like actually redistributing wealth and giving it to people NGOs who are like committed to actually, anti-racist work, or worst case scenario than that, people like who are not NGOs, that is, are profit-making organizations who are committed to doing like anti-racist work. But again, I mean, so that's like super annoying. But those guys are powerful only insofar as they're part of a capitalist regime, which is highly tolerant of them. So I'm not worried about the paternalist part of this. I'm not worried about the Black people who are the victims of like, paternalism that might emerge when we're trying to reckon with their trauma. What you're worried about is like the simple ignoring of the basic needs of an entire population of poor people. And again, worth remembering, numerically, most of the poor are white in this country. And that doesn't make them, like more deserving of redistribution, but it makes them exactly as deserving of redistribution. And before we deal with their trauma, we ought to actually deal with the basic goods that make it possible for people to live.
Yeah, the idea that people want me or anyone I grew up around to work through our trauma or to have institutions that would help us work through our trauma instead of just addressing the actual situation where we didn't have any of the institutional resources that they take for granted in the middle. They take these institutional resources for granted in the middle class, right? But it's like those don't exist for most of us.
So first of all, it's increasingly less taken for granted in the middle class too. So it's the middle class is kind of a relatively shrinking category. And second of all, I mean, it's the social justice of HR. It's basically human resources social justice. And HR works for the boss. And the goal of HR is to make everybody in the workplace as happy as they can be while their labor is being exploited. So like, why do we want that? We don't want that.
Right.
If you're on the left, you don't want that. If you're on the right, you totally don't.
Right. And now going to, I kind of want to bridge back to one of the two major theses of the trouble with diversity that I'd brought up, which was that it legitimizes the system and give you an opportunity to kind of expand on why that is the case, because I said we would get into it, but also I wanted to bridge that with Dr. Adolph Reed Jr. in his The Color Line Then and Now, where he talks about, and I'm looking for the actual I'm seeing, did I highlight it? Probably not. But basically he talks about oh yeah, no, it's like page 272 of Renewing Black Intellectual History says, yet accepting that framework also affirms and reinforces the underlying normative principle that naturalizes inequalities that can be attributed without qualification to market forces or allegedly bad or irresponsible individual behavior. And it's like what he's getting at is that the professional, I don't want to say professional managerial class, but I'm going to say, I'll say the media heads and the educational journalist sort of professionals on the left go a long ways towards basically the framework they are buying into. I'm not sure if I'm going to say this correctly. He has his own way of saying it, but like the frame is oh well, certain groups do or do not deserve their poverty. That's kind of the frame. So you have people come forward and say, the differently abled, we shouldn't call them disabled, we should call them differently abled, and those people have been historically held back or set back, and you have different people taking on these sort of representative roles who will step forward and say, my people, we've been set back. And so it's the academia, especially anywhere that is concerned with social justice, becomes an argument about which people are legitimately represented in inequality. Is that?
Yeah, I mean,
I'm not sure
it's
how
basically,
if I'm saying it right.
well, I mean, you can simplify it by just saying, look, the whole idea of the meritocracy is that some people deserve to succeed and some people don't. So a certain kind of left or left liberal response to that has been to say, well, yeah, but we have nothing like a meritocracy in the U.S., which is totally fucking true. We do have nothing like a meritocracy in the U.S. And what decides that? Well, obviously, Black people have been systematically, I mean, as Adolf would be the first to point out, and was in a way the first to point out in our period anyway. Obviously, there's class differences within Black people. There's no such thing as Black people. But let's say, taking that question for a second, that Black people have been systematically disenfranchised, so they're victimized. The differently abled are victimized. Lots of people are victimized. So the point's going to be, yeah. So what we want to say is people have been systematically victimized for things that have nothing to do with their merit. That is, they basically are the victims of forms of discrimination and prejudice. Those people have been treated unjustly. If you haven't been victimized on account of like your merit, if you haven't been victimized on account of like, if you're a white guy and you're not differently abled and whatever, you're fine, and then you're poor, that's on you. So the point about the meritocracy model has always been that that's actually what it is. If you get away, the market will function. The market will function if it's not fairly, if it's not interfered with by, in effect, irrelevant and unjust concerns, like people treating you differently because you're Black or because you're differently abled or because whatever it's going to be. So that is a kind of, it's completely, it's not, it's completely congruent with the idea that the market finds the best way. It's completely congruent with the idea that social justice adheres in the market. And yeah, absolutely. Universities, and I mean, lots of people go along with that. I mean, the difference between the left and the right on this is only that the right keeps on saying, well, no, they aren't so much the victims of prejudice after all. Slavery's been over for a long time. I wasn't around when slavery was there. Why should I be responsible? It's not as if they're saying, no, everybody deserves universal benefits. The right and the left quarrel over basically a human resources set of problems. Who are the people who should count as the victims of discrimination? So you want to say from the standpoint of like an actual left, that's a completely empty question. We shouldn't be fighting over the question over who are the real victims of discrimination. We should not discriminate against anybody who's being discriminated against, but our attempts to redistribute should be redistribution that has nothing to do with the question of whether you've been the victim of discrimination. So yeah, there's a way in which, there's a kind of inevitable competition once you set up being a victim of discrimination as the kind of goal, as the barrier to gain some kind of preferential treatment or to gain actually kind of equality of treatment. There's a kind of commitment to understanding yourself, understanding your victims as precisely victims of discrimination. What they're actually victims of is victims of capitalism. I mean, you see, it's a perfect version of the triumph of this mode of thinking among sort of white Trump supporters, the overwhelming Trump supporters, where poll after poll shows that these guys feel they are the victims of racism, anti-white racism, thing everywhere. So, they're
Right.
fucking not the victims of anti-white racism. There's like almost nobody in this country who's the victim of anti-white racism. What are they the victims of? They're the victims of capitalism. If you want to understand how ideology works, in this case, here's how ideology works. Ideology works by telling you if you're the victim of something, if you're feeling victimized and you are actually in fact victimized, whatever you're the victim of, it's not the victim of capitalism. So yes, the way in which a whole bunch of the white working class currently expresses its dissatisfaction with capitalism is by completely misunderstanding it and treating it as if it were a dissatisfaction with anti-white racism, and by erecting the specter of anti-white racism. And the utility of unions like the UAW in the current moment and people like Sean Fain is that they're not falling for that. They're not worried about being the victims of anti-white racism. They're worried about actually being the victims of right-wing and largely under the Obama administration, but to give them credit a little bit less under the Biden administration, anti-union, anti-worker policies that have been basically pursued by both parties, since Roosevelt.
Okay. Well, and I want to play devil's advocate here to see. I'm curious what you'll say. In the book Hate Crime Hoax by Wilfred Riley, he talks about how affirmative action has made it in a lot of cases so that a student with a 3.0 coming from one of the protected or prioritized groups is going to be able to take the place of somebody with a 4.0 who happens to be white or male. And along those lines, you've got.
Does he mention how many colleges and universities were, when it was still legal, using affirmative action?
How many colleges, universities were doing what?
Only super selective colleges and universities have ever had affirmative action commitments. University like mine, UIC, we didn't have to worry about. We didn't have so who goes to those colleges? Overwhelmingly, like at Middlebury College, just to take a number I can remember, where there was a big anti-racist demonstration years ago against Murray, who is a racist and who deserved all the stuff that went to him. They weren't wrong about that. The median family income, Charles Murray, the median family income of those kids was $233,000. So, okay, here's the problem. A black kid who had a slightly lower GPA than a white kid might have gotten into Middlebury. That is, in the class fraction of the not upper middle class, but basically fucking rich people, some relatively rich, but not quite as rich perhaps as the others, black people, and relatively well scoring, but not quite as high scoring as some rich white kids, can't get into the institution a rich white kid goes to, and therefore the rich white kid, instead of going to Middlebury, will have to go to a slightly lesser school. No offense to Colby or whatever, but let's say something like Colby. I don't know that much about those colleges. That's a fucking social injustice, and I'm not prepared to worry about for 14 seconds. The minute you start worrying about that one, you're on the royal road to oh my God, cancel culture. And and then you're on the royal road to the right. So if your idea of social justice is equality for the rich, we don't want with the idea that some black kid would get into Harvard over my daughter, who had a fucking 4.0 and also did this and this and this just because he's black, is outrageous. I'm not interested in your social problems. That's what it means to be on the left, is not actually to worry about fine tuning. Both those kids have a whole lot of access to the goods that society will deliver to them, not even counting the inherited wealth part, right? So the question of how these universities manipulate their things is a completely affirmative action was a hoax to begin with, and anti-affirmative action is a different version of the same hoax. Okay. Affirmative action was a hoax because it got everybody to give a chance to say, hey man, we're totally committed to social justice because we're here at Harvard, we only used to have 4% black kids. Now we have 18% of black kids. And anti-affirmative action is a social justice because it says we're totally committed to social justice because now it won't matter whether you're black or white to get you into Harvard. The real way to get social justice would be to get rid of fucking Harvard, or to nationalize Harvard, take away all that money and turn Harvard into a public school, and like all the other schools, make them public schools as well.
So
So
that
yeah,
sounds
the
that
devil's
sounds
advocate is
like
useful for me because the devil's advocate, like the person who's worried about that problem, is, from my standpoint of view, the problem. The anti-affirmative action guy is exactly the same problem as the affirmative action person.
yeah, that sounds well, first of all, that makes a lot of sense. And also something that I've already said, and I say it in my most recent book, is that the role of this kind of representation, recognition, redistribution sort of focused politics that doesn't prioritize large scale structural change is to make the workers who are white or black in this case feel like their problems are the same problems as the, say Jay-Z or Bill Clinton's problems, like, oh,
The way we put it in no politics, class politics, it turns like basically your class enemy into your racial brother. So like, when if you're like living far west side of Chicago, and you think, yeah, but you're supposed to look over at the University of Chicago and see all the black kids over there and think, well, it's true, I'm totally fucked. By the other hand, my people are well represented. We can go to Chicago now. I mean, why people think they should work with black people is a mystery to me. It's never, so far as I know, ever worked for any white person. I've never known of any like white guy going to like, Chicago State saying it's true. I'm going to this thing, which it's not going to produce for me a kind of high income, et cetera, et cetera. But I feel a lot better knowing that so many of my white brothers are going to the University of Chicago. So, I mean, it's transparently implausible, and not only implausible, but insulting to think that works for white people. But the idea then is, well, we can get away with it with black people. And you
right.
get away with it even better because, of course, some black people, like, the whole kind of upper middle class of the liberal left, they're totally into selling that, which is the idea that everybody loves to think of their own success as not just their own success, but a success for their people. But, I know that my success, which is limited, just like an English professor, but my success is not on behalf of my people. I don't have any people. Nobody's got any people. What you want is actually not to rise from the class, as the old thing goes, but to rise with the class. And rising with the class does not involve making sure that everybody has an equal chance to get into Harvard or the University of Chicago, whatever your institutional choice is.
Well, and it became popular for people to sort of disavow Ibram X. Kendi and Robin DiAngelo when they were bestsellers and taking a little heat during 2020 and 2021, and then people would say, "Oh, that's not real CRT. That's not real critical race theory." Well, so I read this book, and Kimberly Crenshaw, she's the one who coined it, and she also coined intersectionality, right? And she's a Harvard Law School professor. And her focus and the main theme in this whole book is affirmative action. Like, they don't have much beyond affirmative action, but it does seem like where they agree with Ibram X. Kendi and Robin DiAngelo is that you and me, Walter, we have to see ourselves as white people, and our people have done well. And they, on the other hand, not Robin excluded, they, on the other hand, their people, not so much. And as renewing Black intellectual history develops the thesis, history has, this sort of liberal history has tended to interpret the periods of racial history, whether it's good or bad for Black people, on the basis of how white people felt at the time, not looking at the political economy of racism, right? Not
the whole thing the whole thing you can see that, that exact edition. I don't remember the page number, but I don't remember if it has an index, but if it does have an index, look up class in it. And basically the only reference to class in it is that CRT hasn't yet developed a kind of like thorough theory of class. But work has been shown suggesting that like in poverty, working class and then lower class, however they put it in there, Black people are not only disproportionately working class, but actually Black people suffer more in the working class. So, I mean, the whole point of CRT is to understand justice as a fundamentally racial problem. Well, but the whole point of the right is to understand social justice as a fundamentally racial problem. And the whole point of a whole bunch of like angry white guys is to understand social justice as a fundamentally racial problem in which now white guys are getting fucked. So the whole point of no politics but class politics is not to understand social justice as fundamentally or even primarily or even largely a racial problem, despite the very real truth that Black people are disproportionately poor, and indeed are disproportionately poor for reasons that have a lot to do with racism. A way to put it is like racism has often been the problem, but anti-racism is not the solution. Sexism has been the problem, but anti-sexism is not the solution. You know, a kind of pure version of this, going back to trouble with diversity, it's a long time ago, I won't remember the exact numbers, but a class action suit by white clerks, by women clerks, class action suit by women clerks at Walmart, claiming they were systematically underpaid in relation to the white men. And they were totally right. They were systematically underpaid. They were paid, I don't know, like $19,500 a year. Whereas white guys, not just white guys doing the equivalent work were paid like $21,000, $1,500 more. Under American law, that's the only thing they can do to raise their wages, because neither one of them can go to court to say, you know what, neither the men nor the women's being paid a living fucking wage. If you raise all the women's salaries to $21,500, that's $21,000, whatever it could be. That's actually a little bit good, but now they're just starving at a slightly higher level that the men are starving. So when you actually sort of think about this from the standpoint of capital, it's great. Capitalism understood right from the start. It's great to have like the men and women at each other's throats, or to have the white and Black at each other's throats. Right. You know, there's a reason why unite and fight, Black and white unite and fight was a thing, should be a thing again, and hopefully will be a thing again. It's because, in fact, you know, the enemy, despite what gets said all the time, is not white people. It's disproportionately white people who have all the money, but it's like actually capitalism. It's the top 10% that have the money, whether they're white or Black. So, I mean, yeah, the point of it is, again, the point of this is not to get outraged that CRT thinks it's only about Black people, and therefore to think, what about us poor fucking white people? It's to say, no, CRT is a fundamentally capitalist description of injustice. It's no accident that after George Floyd, Kimberly Crenshaw, you know, appeared in the New York Times saying, you know, that a lot of firms, a lot of the big corporations seem to understand the question of social justice a lot better than the Bernie Sanders campaign did. Right. Because Sanders kept on arguing for universalism, he's arguing for workers. And the corporations kept on saying, absolutely. You know, most of them haven't come up with the money, as Adolf wrote in The Nation recently. But Goldman Sachs was all over it. We're going to actually make our employees look like kind of diverse as the country indeed as the world is. We're going to try and guarantee equality of pay for all of them. But you know, Goldman Sachs could be a perfect mirror of the world. Goldman Sachs could be run by, you know, Black lesbians, and they still are like Goldman Sachs. They're agents of evil, ripping people off and making a lot of money out of doing it, making that system work. So who cares who runs them? Who cares what their commitment to social justice is? But yeah, absolutely. When Kim Crenshaw produces that, she's producing simply the kind of left liberal version of the right-wing version, which is that what we want is for the market to rule, and then we want to kind of like adjust the market circumstances. And the battle between the people who are for CRT and the people against CRT is in the end a battle between two different models of how the market should work, rather than a battle against the market itself.
All right. Well, I think that's a great place to segue here. And so thank you so much for joining us. If you want to stick around in the green room for a little bit more with Nance, you're welcome to stick around. But for now, thank you for joining us on the live stream.
Great. Thanks very much.
All right. Take care. We'll be right back, everybody, right after this.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, a place for workers with earbuds who are tired of letting others read and think on their behalf, slipstreaming our way into an understanding of the situation that short-circuits the deadlocks of our moment.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation. Theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
Theory Underground is coming to a city near you. What that has meant in the last year is traveling across the United States, into Canada, and then all over Europe to promote our books, courses, and ideas related to time energy and underground theory.
You've been reading Underground Theory.
I'm a publisher and an editor. I run a review of books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Okay, picture this scene. America, early 2021. An Amazon warehouse worker arises from the emerging underground theory internet scene to create spaces for untimely topics and concerns that are too often neglected or kept in isolation today. Joined by a revolving cast of underground theorists, academics, and critics, he establishes what will become Theory Underground, a teaching, research, and publishing platform by and for working-class intellectuals, autodidacts, and academics who want to do more than they're able to do within the confines of academia. That warehouse worker's name is David McKerracher, and his book Time Energy is his first major contribution to the world of theory. It was recently reprinted with a foreword by none other than Slavoj Žižek, who also contributed to Theory Underground's latest book.
My Bible, it's an excellent book.
A collection of essays called Underground Theory.
What you just heard is an excerpt from the Strange Exiles podcast, episode 23, where Bram from Strange Exiles interviewed me and Mikey. For those who don't know, Mikey is the author of the Dangerous Maybe blog. We are publishing one of his books here shortly at Theory Underground. He's also a lecturer at Theory Underground, and he's someone I've been friends and a collaborator with for over 10 years. But most importantly for you all, he's a fantastic lecturer, and it's a crime that he has to do wage labor right now. One of the long-term goals of Theory Underground has been now for a couple of years to hashtag free Mikey. That is something that I've been really pushing, but first I had to get freed from wage labor, which was achieved this year. That's right. Thanks to my monthly seminar subscribers, I was able to quit Amazon and do Theory Underground full time. Now I'm announcing the next big phase of the plan, which is the Mikey Down seminar. What monthly subscribers to the Mikey seminar are paying for is a survey of philosophy, including deep dives into Žižek, Land, Lacan, Baudrillard, Bataille, Lyotard, and ultimately the whole history of philosophy.
We're trying to build like this ongoing seminar, right? And that's what I really like about this thing, where, you know, if I'm teaching a main text, that's something I got to focus on. I got to really, but the seminar thing, we can do this stuff all the time where we dive deeper into concepts, we dive deeper into certain, you know, sections of books or whatever, and we can really do this nuanced stuff.
I think that there's probably no better way for us to accelerate our learning in these areas than by slipstreaming Mikey. And that has been my belief for years and years and years now. It's official. You're able to help out. You're able to get involved. You're able to benefit directly from liberating him from wage labor. Get on it right now. Do it. Just go. Stop what you're doing. Go click the button. Subscribe. This is what you do. Subscribe to him. If you're already signed up for the ongoing Theory Underground seminars, then that's the ones that I do with my wife, Anne. Though that's getting an upgrade, which means that I will be doing one session per month that is just me, and then I will also be doing the ones with Anne, which are a crash course in sociology, anthropology, the social sciences, and ultimately Marx, Heidegger, Levinas, Bourdieu, imminently critiquing pop psychology, sociology, self-help, and ultimately the doxa of our time. But if you would like to be a subscriber to both Mikey's seminar and the seminar that the Snellgrove McKerrachers are doing, then the best way is to become a tier 4 subscriber, or you can be a tier 2 subscriber to each of us. The reason this matters is because tier 2 is like pretty much the best bang for your buck. It gives you huge discounts on all of the courses that we do. But if you can't afford it, tier 4 is amazing because it gives you tier 3 access at both Mikey's seminar and ours.
And finally, not everybody has time to be part of these ongoing research seminars, and they just want to fund the paid content for the YouTube and podcast. And so thank you so much to our patrons over at Patreon. They're the ones funding all the free stuff. So big thank you to Bert, Marilyn, Carl, Sahil, Zozandra, Nikolai, Darian, Tyler, and Mandeep, and all the other wonderful Patreon people. Patreon people. And thank you to all the other wonderful Patreon people. Thank you so much to all of you patrons and also to the special subscribers and the paying subscribers. Oh my God. It's just so awkward. Thank you, Patreon. Patrons. Thank you. Oh, okay. And to all the other wonderful patrons. Thank you so much, all you patrons. And also a special thanks to the subscribers on the YouTube side, as well as the paying subscribers over at Substack. Why can't we do this? Fuck. You guys, just thank you. Thank you, everyone, for making this bullshit possible. Thank you to the subscribers. You do it. You did so good. Thanks, guys.